Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and this is my fourth Cromwellathon video. I will post the announcement video for the Cromwellathon project in the description box below. Suffice it to say, we are reading our way through Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell trilogy, the third and final book of which is going to be published in March. In this video, I am going to be talking about the chapters Alas, What Shall I Do for Love?, Early Mass, and Anna Regina. And before I get into particulars, I wanted to just kind of point out that I felt like, this is the third time I've read the book, for those of you who don't know, that I felt like the chapter Alas, What Shall I Do for Love? Is probably the weakest chapter in the book. I just feel like, you know, by and large, the prose in that section is not quite as, it's not quite as sharp or as supple as it is in the earlier chapters. And it also just makes me wonder if it has to do with that chapter being the hinge, right, between the beginning of the book and the end of the book. Oftentimes in trilogies, it's thought that the middle book is the weakest book, right? And again, because it serves this function as a kind of hinge, it doesn't necessarily have its own identity so much as, you know, it's the connective tissue between the first part and the last part. So, you know, reading the book this time, I found myself wondering if that was true of this chapter, right? There's a lot of really good stuff in the chapter, but I just felt like the writing felt slightly impatient at times, like she was just really trying to kind of hurry through it to get to the events later in the book, but it could just be that I felt that way and no one else. But now on to a few details that I wanted to look at, many of which are actually from that chapter. Like I said, there's a ton of really great stuff in it. I just felt like the prose itself maybe wasn't as assured as it is elsewhere in the novel. So on page 342 here in my edition, there was this passage here. Down in the kitchens at Austin Friars, the Garzoni are learning to make spiced wafers. The process involves a good eye, exact timing, and a steady hand. There are so many points at which it can go wrong. The mixture must have the right dropping consistency. The plates of the long-handled irons must be well greased and hot. When you press the plates together, there is an animal shriek as they meet, and steam hisses into the air. If you panic and release the pressure, you will have a claggy mess to scrape away. You must wait till the steam dies down, and then you start counting. If you miss a beat, the smell of scorching permeates the air. A second divides the successes from the failures. And what I love so much about that passage is that it seemed to me a very clear metaphor for not just the architecture of Henry's court, but also for Cromwell's professional and political designs. You just really get a sense as you're reading this book how precarious everything is, how tenuous, right? That it's really like a kind of house of cards that might collapse at any moment. And so I love this idea of the spiced wafers, of the creation of the spiced wafers. That you have to count the seconds, and you know, one moment too long, and what could have been perfect ends up being scorched, ends up being burned and ruined. It's just a lovely metaphor, I thought. On page 353, Cromwell is, I think, 9 years old, has a fight with his father, and runs away, runs off to London, and there's a burning that's getting ready to take place. And he's never seen one, and he's heard about them, but he's never witnessed one, and so he's curious. And of course, there's a woman in the crowd who fashions herself his surrogate mother in that moment, and you know, wants him up front so he can see it, and it's very chilling in the way that she seems to think nothing of this, and yeah, wants him to have the education. And as they are preparing the woman to be burned, as they bring her out and what have you, at one point, young Cromwell says, "What's her crime?" And they said, "She is a loller." That's one who says the god on the altar is a piece of bread, right? So, and not the actual bread being turned into the body of Christ. Somebody who thinks that it's merely bread, and that the idea of communion is a metaphor. And he just doesn't understand as a young boy. He just doesn't doesn't see the fault in the thinking, really, in the Lawler's thinking. And then later, further down the page, he says, but what's her sin? He said, and they said, I told you. She says the saints are but wooden posts. And he says, like that post they're chaining her to. And they say, aye, just like that. And what I found so striking about this section is that extremists, go about these things, right? Burning people at the stake, or endorsing the torture of captives. And they think that it's going to scare people away from taking the positions of those who are being burned or those who are being tortured. And there may be some of that. But what it does more often than not, it seems to me, is that it awakens or inspires empathy in the people who are observing what's happening, right? So, so Western governments, right, arrest people on suspicion of terrorism, and they torture them. And their actions, right, the actions of these Western nations create a kind of hotbed of terrorists in the Middle East and elsewhere. It has the opposite effect, and I think that the burning here, right, young Cromwell witnessing the burning, I think it has the opposite effect. He is not, like so many people in the crowd, getting caught up in the kind of bloodthirsty frenzy of it, and instead he's curious. He just keeps asking, like, what is her crime? What is her sin? Why is this happening to her? And then he prays for, like, when it's all over, when it's all said and done, and the people who had been friends with her come out to collect her remains. Young Thomas is praying for her. And you get the sense that this scene from his childhood is formative in the creation of Cromwell's mature mind, right, in who he becomes. Maybe this woman has a point. Why wouldn't she have a point? Then we see him as an older man, right, and he is sympathetic to that point of view. He's sympathetic to that perspective, and you get the feeling that it has a lot to do with his having witnessed such cruelty towards someone for something that he seemed to think was inoffensive and common sense, really. But on 378, I just loved this, right? If you'll remember from the reading for last week, I think it was the reading from last week, where Cavendish was telling Cromwell about Wolsey's arrest and what happened, and how Harry Percy really seemed to enjoy dragging Wolsey in. I won't go into the whole reason why Cromwell is visiting Percy. It has to do with Percy claiming that he's either engaged to or already married to Anne Boleyn, which of course pisses Henry off and pisses Anne Boleyn off and all of her family and blah, 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 blah. Let's just say that Cromwell shows up to dissuade Percy from carrying this line of thought any further. And so Cromwell is talking about how Henry will strip Percy of his titles, right? Take away his land, take away his castles. And then Percy says he will not. He respects all ancient titles, all ancient rights. And then Cromwell says, then let's say I will. And and then he thinks, let's say I will rip your life apart, me and my banker friends. And he just scares the shit out of Percy. And when Cromwell leaves, it's pretty clear that Percy has been utterly cowed. He's been transformed into a kind of mouse, and that he will be retracting his claims the moment he is asked to. And it's just wonderful to see just how terrifying Cromwell can be, because we see him really funny in the book as well. We also see him incredibly tender. We see how perceptive he is, how quick-witted he is. But I just love these moments where we see how terrifying he is. He's just such a completely realized character. It's a joy to read. Another example of this, right? This idea of the dominoes of vengeance being set up occurs just a little bit later in the book. It says, Brereton glares. You've been writing letters up to Chester. The king's business, how not? They must do this in a mutter as Roland joins the hands of bride and groom. I'll tell you just once, keep away from my family's affairs, or you'll come off worse, Master Cromwell, than you can imagine. Anne is attended by only one lady, her sister. As they leave, the king towing his wife, hand on her upper arm, towards a little harp music. Mary turns and gives him a sumptuous smile. She holds up her hand, thumb and finger an inch apart. She had always said, I will be the first to know. It will be me who lets out her bodices. Cromwell calls William Brereton back politely. He says, you have made a mistake in threatening me. And that's just, yeah, it gives me goosebumps to read that. Yeah, Cromwell at times feels like a character from a mafia film or something like this. Like he's the Godfather in Tudor England. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is in the Anna Regina chapter. And it's right near the end of it. And I feel like while that Alas, What Shall I Do for Love chapter is a little bit weaker, I feel like it absolutely corrects in Anna Regina, and that the prose in that chapter is just much stronger, much more beautiful. And the end of the Anna Regina chapter is some of the best writing in the book, it seemed to me. But we have the scene where John Frith is being burned, and we're not there with it, but we learn that at the same time as Frith is being burned, that Henry and Cromwell are hunting together, and Henry just seems like a big kid, just cheerful, and wants to write love letters to Anne and can't seem to kind of get it right, and so wants Cromwell to write the letter, and Henry will tell him what to say and whatnot. Everything just feels very trivial and frivolous in Henry's world at that time, and it's at the same time that this man is being burned to death for being convicted about his beliefs, right? For merely being convicted about his own ideas of religion, and it just made me think about how politicians will do that, right? Even today, I mean, a politician can order a massacre, can order a carpet bombing, and then just return to bed and watch reruns of Seinfeld while they fall asleep. There's something so putrid about that, about people who can do that. And this scene, the juxtaposition of Henry having a grand old time with John Frith burning at the stake, reminded me of the scene in the Lord of the Rings films when Faramir leads his men to almost certain death, while his self-absorbed, gluttonous, vile father is just sitting alone at a feast table, just stuffing his face. And while who is it, Pippin? I think Pippin is singing to him, has been commanded to sing to him. It just makes me heartsick to think how politicians have always been this way and will likely always be this way, that they can order people to their deaths and think nothing of it, right? Can watch Seinfeld or eat a spread of McDonald's. Yeah, it's just disgusting to me. It's really disgusting to me. But anyway, those are the things that I wanted to chat with you guys about in Wolf Hall this week. For next week, we are finishing the book. So yeah, my video should be up next Saturday. My last Wolf Hall video should be up next Saturday. I apologize again for this one being a day late. If you missed my community post, it was because I was a little bit behind in the reading, and I couldn't film last night because I had to go to a fundraiser dinner for work, which was awesome. I got to eat as much crab as I wanted, and I was so messy at the end of that 45 minutes. It was crazy. But yeah, so we're gonna finish Wolf Hall for next weekend. And I promise to get caught up on comments as well, on responding to comments. Yeah, I've been so busy, and I try to do a little bit of it every day, but I've fallen off the last couple of days. So I will try to get all of that caught up by next weekend as well. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this section of the book in the comments below. I also look forward to seeing the videos from those of you who are making videos for Cromwellathon, and I will talk to you guys again very soon. Adios.